in today's stream, we're going to be doing something a little different. We don't usually do these, but we're going to be doing a quick summary for the chapter analysis on Tuesday. I decided to do this just for people that maybe they don't have the time to watch an entire 40-minute video, which I completely understand. So this will be basically a stream where it's a quick one. It's going to be a quick little, we go boom, boom, boom through the chapter, kind of give my quick thoughts and all that. This is going to be like a 10, 20-minute live stream just on that. And then if chat has any questions, you know, we'll look at that as well. Let me get chat pulled up alongside of when I actually start reviewing the chapter. But yeah, so again, if you're just stumbling on this stream and want the more detailed version, go watch the video. This is going to be a very much condensed and or shorter version. But, hi Mar, by the way. This chapter is the prologue, like the title says. And crap, I did not have time to read the prologue. Well, Jesse, we're going to be giving you the quick read, basically. Hi, Young Wolf, as well. So this chapter starts with our main three characters of the chapter, Will, Garrett, and Waymar Royce. They are all three part of the Night's Watch, and they've been sent on this mission to track down a band of wildlings. And a lot of this chapter's focus is really just on how do they handle this situation? Like, what is their actual mission here? Because we learned that Jorah Mormont basically, I hate, by the way, this is just a little pet peeve I have. I hate that Jorah and Jorah Mormont sound so similar. Why did George do that? Also, hi, Matthew. So their whole idea is Jorah Mormont told them, okay, track this group of wildlings. And they do, right? As we find out with Will in this chapter, Will tracks them, and the others do as well, but Will's the one that finds them, and they are all actually dead. Now, everything surrounding their death is quite weird, because the fire, like they had a fire at one point, it's just not going anymore. They had wood, they had all the means to get warm, and I don't really, like, as our characters talk about, they don't understand how these people would have died. They had all the means to food. It's very unnatural the way they die. And that's the whole idea here, is we have two real opposing forces that are in this situation, being Garrett and then Royce, where they're talking about this idea of, okay, should we figure out how they died, or should we just go back and say they died? And they're both two compelling arguments, because you can see both of them, right? Where Garrett, he's the veteran, he kind of has this uneasy feeling, and he just wants to leave, right? He thinks their mission is done because they've been killed. While Royce, he's a newer guy here, he's been at the watch less than like a year. He's been there, I think, a half a year, 6 months, around that area. And he's in charge of the three, which it shows you a lot of the, what would you say, privilege, more or less, of higher-born people, right? Whereas someone like Garrett, in today's world, you would assume, right, if you have been in this job or whatever, you've been doing this for 40 years, you would assume you would be in control of, like, at least your little department. That is not the case here. The youngest one here is in control of the party, and unfortunately for Will and Garrett, Royce wants to figure out what's going on with these bodies. And I don't even blame Royce, because this does make sense, right? You would want to figure out why they died, especially when it's your first ranging. You don't want to be a failure, and you have a lot of pressure on you, especially when you look at it, his being his first ranging. Also, Yamar, I am not going to really talk a lot on characters that are not inside this chapter. These streams are going to be more for, like, just doing a quick summary of the chapter, as well as if you guys have questions while we're going through it and the chapters as a whole. I don't mind the Mormont names, but the Asha and Osha, yeah, that's not a fun one. Hi Evie, how are you? All right, so with that out of the way, that's kind of the whole idea of the first half of this chapter, is kind of deciding what they're going to do and looking at all of the evidence. And like I've talked about, it really doesn't make sense for these people to be freezing to death even without the fire, because we're told that the wall is weeping, which would indicate it's not as cold, or it's not cold enough to kill someone, is what basically Garrett suggests. And this kind of leads them to go to the campsite and all of that. Where are my friends? My friends do not come into the Song of Ice and Fire streams for the most part. And then they were doing Rings of Power with me for a little while, but they all stopped watching it because it was bad. But yeah, so continuing on, what they end up kind of coming to is this idea that Garrett is going to watch the horses because somebody needs to watch the horses, and Will and Waymar will go figure out what happened with the dead people and kind of get their answers, right? And again, something that's very present throughout this entire chapter is the growing feeling of coldness and also fear, right? When we don't really understand that. That's another good point that Young Wolf brings up in the chat, that there was no blood with the bodies, which was quite weird, right? Because you would think, okay, if they got stabbed, if they got attacked by something, there would be blood. So you would think it would be something like the coldness or this or that. But it just doesn't make any sense to. And what ends up happening with that, what I was getting at, is that it's a feeling that continues to grow on them, right? Where Garrett continuously through this chapter is like, we should pull back, this or that, and trying to reason with Waymar, and Waymar's just not having it, right? And I talked about this a lot in the video. I referenced this a couple times. It reminds me a lot of the Nazgul from Lord of the Rings, where it's a growing just feeling of fear as they get closer, right? So if we look at, for instance, the Hobbits, when they first encounter the Nazgul, it's kind of like this feeling where Frodo doesn't know why he should be hiding from them, but he just feels it. There's a sudden sense of fear, and it's something that even procs him to almost put the ring on. That it's very similar to the way the whole fear factor and cold is used in this first chapter. And so we basically have the splitting of our party. Garrett stays behind, and the other two go on. We have another little internal, or not internal conflict, but a conflict between Garrett and Waymar, where it's like, should they light a fire? And this is interesting because when you really think about it, they're both right to a degree, where Garrett's like, okay, you know, what if there are wolves around? What are dire wolves? He specifically says dire wolves, but it's more like wolves. I would expect to see more. And then, you know, if there's the White Walkers or the others, and then you have it on the other side where Waymar's like, well, if there's people around, we don't want them to know exactly where we are and if we're coming, which, again, both sides make sense, but you should probably go with the side that's been doing this for 40 years. It's one of those things where people, and you see this a lot throughout the story and even the real world, where people with experience, sometimes people just don't take their advice for literally no reason. If we even look at the small council meetings, right? If we even look, okay, here's a great example. So if we look at the show scene with like Tywin and Tommen, where Tywin's like, what do you do to be a good king? You listen to people with advice on things that you don't know about. That is a very big thing that Waymar is not doing as a commander. He's not really weighing in the advice of people unless it's suiting his own ideology. So when it comes to how did the wildlings die, he takes Garrett's advice then because it suits what he wants to do. But yeah, awesome. All right, we'll let them know. I like the Maester. Yes, Aemon is also listed in here. I agree. When I was reading the prologue, when I got to that scene, I thought of, yeah, Lord of the... There's a lot of things, and I recorded chapter 2 on Wednesday, and I think I edited it yesterday. There is another thing that's very Lord of the Rings-ish. If we look at, in that chapter, so this will be a little sneak peek, when we look at Ned's kind of speech to Bran, where he's talking about the old ways, and you need to be able to look someone in the eye if you're going to kill them or sentence them to death, and then do it. And it's a lot of, in that chapter, talking about the idea of people become immune to death. When they're not the one killing the people, they become almost immune to it, right? And I think that's an interesting idea because it really reminds me a lot of Gandalf's kind of speech to Frodo about Gollum, right? So I don't know. I think that's an interesting idea that George R. R. Martin definitely, especially in this first book, took a lot of inspiration from Tolkien. Yes, that's another thing, Young Wolf, is that this being his first ranging, he didn't want to go back to Georg Mormont and be like, hey, they died, but I can't tell you why. I don't really, we just tracked them to this spot and they died, but we really have no idea how they died. You know, so it does look really bad on Waymar about that. Yes, and pride is a huge idea. We need a Nazgul-like aspect for the White Walkers or like the Four Horsemen. That'd be really cool if we did. Mace Rayman is such an interesting character and one of my favorites. Yes, he's a very good character. But that will lead us to Will and Waymar going off by themselves to look at the camp. And what I think is interesting is it shows the very stark differences between Will and Waymar's approach to this, where Will is still being very cautious, right? He's getting on his belly or his stomach, and he's like, you know, crawling up to look down onto the little camp, while Royce is just kind of walking up there through the bushes. He's making a big racket. He's catching his sword on bushes and stuff like that. He's a very arrogant person at this moment, and it really shows because when you think about it, I mentioned this in the chapter review as well, where when they actually get to the crest of like this little hill looking down on it, right? He's just kind of standing in the wide open, like he's having his big hero moment, right? Where, you know, in every single like movie or something, like you'll have that scene where the hero is sitting or standing on like a hill or a mountain. You have this really cool shot. And that's really what we get there. Hi, Zen. How are you? And I'm doing good. Maybe Mar. Yeah, so I think the whole idea that George is trying to set up is people not listening to advice and following pride and arrogance. It's something we see quite a lot. Billy Bob must be dead. Yeah, he got assassinated. I agree with that, Matthew. Okay, so they make it to the camp, and shockingly, there are no bodies anywhere around. The weapon, there's an axe that's specifically talked about and previously in the chapter, and it's still there, but the bodies have just disappeared. And the rational, right, response to this would be, what happened? This is really weird. Waymar is joking. It really shows his arrogance in this, because why would you be laughing at this situation? Like, you know, Will isn't just lying to you. The only thing I could think about is as of why Waymar was like maybe laughing is that maybe he thought Will was lying so that they could go back to the wall because it was getting colder and stuff. But it really just shows Royce's arrogance. And yeah, it's interesting because what ends up happening is Royce is like, well, we got to find him now. And Will, understandably, at this point, is just spooked. Like, you've watched dead bodies just move or disappear. Because, as we note early on in the chapter as well, Will notes, like, they could not have been just laying on the ground, just pretending to be asleep. One, they had no idea Will was coming because, again, very, like, big description that Will could move very silently. Nobody would have seen him or heard him, right? So they weren't playing dead, and he stayed there for a while, like, looking at their breathing, and nobody moved, right? Nobody did anything, right? So, understandably, Will's a little shaken, and what ends up happening, again, I note that this is very much like Lord of the Rings again, or I guess The Hobbit, more or less, but Bilbo, or Will, goes up in the tree to kind of figure out where the wildlings are, and all of a sudden, the others appear. And I want to note something because I want to ask what you guys think about this. Do you think the White Walkers or the others knew of their presence, like, long before? So, because my thing here is, when Will goes to the camp the first time, why wouldn't they have killed Will then? Unless Will actually was very stealthy and gets to the camp without anybody actually knowing, and that these bodies were actually dead, and had not been like risen up yet. Because I'm not sure, because we know that the others were just getting closer to them as soon as or let me rephrase that. We know that they were getting closer to them the entire chapter. Like, they were getting closer and closer. The cold picks up, the wind picks up over and over and over again. We hear it constantly throughout this chapter, and their fear grows. I remember reading this for the first time such a long time ago. The fear and tension was real. That's how you transform. Yeah, it's a very good chapter. And what I think is interesting is that I wish I had read this for the first time without the show. Moments like the Red Wedding for me would have been so much better. And I don't know. It just sucks to me that I had I had watched the show before the books, in my opinion. But I have noted at the end of this chapter was a 10 out of 10 for me. Like, it is a perfect start. I really have no complaints in this. But yeah. J-Lord, I will address that maybe in a future video or stream, because I kind of want to stay on track. But yes, there is a big difference on the way the show displayed wealth compared to the books. And that can come down to budgeting, showing how much the Lannisters are basically built on wealth, because the Starks by no means are poor. Like, they have servants. They are and they're described very richly as well. It really revealed to us how much free will and this is something that I think is interesting. So when we have this conflict with the others, they very much have human emotions. They have thoughts. They have a language that the others can understand, right? Because when Royce, dies, right? So basically what ends up happening is Royce is in a 1v1 with one of them, the first one that pops out. He ends up basically losing, right? And he just starts getting laughed at. So he gets laughed at right before he dies, when he does his last, like, kind of final hurrah. And then he also is getting laughed at by all the others that are coming out, and they're kind of stabbing him and all this stuff. And you can definitely tell that there was some intent there. And yes, Royce did die like a badass. I didn't specifically mention it, but he says for Robert, basically, and has this, like, last heroic, like, swing, and it does not go well. But that is basically the end of Royce. Zen asks, also, what's your thoughts on the fact that the others were not mute like in the show? I like that we understand that they are a higher form of beings, like that they understand, and they're not just these zombies. Because in the show, it very much paints them as the Night King is the only one with any type of thought process. It comes across like that to me. Where in the show, it's just like the Night King is really the only character here, right? Because I'd be interested to see, when we learn more about the others, do all of them have their own goals? Do they all have different motivations? Or are they of like a hive mind, but they all can functionally think, but they're all working towards the same goal? It is a very interesting concept to talk about. He definitely did get emoted on, by the way, Young Wolf. It is interesting why Royce may have gone to the Night's Watch. I see it as something where he was a younger son, so he wasn't set to inherit anything, kind of like Jon. This is still is seen as a kind of an honorable thing, like, because, again, the Royces would honor the Wall and stuff like that. I think it was one of those things where he was looking to find glory and or stature at the Wall, and it just wasn't really the place for him. It's one of those things where I note this, again, in the next chapter, is that there's a lot of things here to show Jon that the Wall is not a great place, and it's a pretty shit place in general, and it kind of goes right over Jon's head. The others are also described as beautiful. They seem like ice elves to me. I think they might have a society of towns. But yes, and this is what I think is interesting, is that the others seem like they are just a higher form of life, where they have this armor that almost camouflages them, right? Whether that's them in darkness, whether that's in the moonlight, whether that's in shrubbery. it goes a long way to show why they've stayed hidden for so long, because it's hard to spot them. Will knows they're coming. He's up above, and these others aren't even trying to hide themselves at this point, and he still has trouble seeing them, right? That's a good point, Zen, is that I'm not sure how that works either. I would assume that Craster gives them to the others, and one way or another, they eventually grow up and turn into a white. I would assume that's how it works. He doesn't want to see it. I think it's willful blindness. That's correct. Yes, agreed, Aaron. Agreed. Oh, John doesn't want to see it. That could be. That could be. Well, I mean, we'll explore that a lot in this series because John is very much a focal point of this story. And it is interesting to go into his head on what his thoughts are about the Night's Watch, because it should be fairly obvious to him that this is not a good place. And people kind of lie to him to a degree about it. Like, Benjen, to a degree, is not fully transparent with John about kind of what goes on there. But let's finish up with this chapter. And what ends up happening at the end of this chapter is Will's kind of up in this tree. He hasn't said anything. He's been too in shock and fear. And he just can't say anything. And by the time the others kind of come in to finish off Royce, he's just basically hugging the tree. He's not looking down. He just can't. Like, if he looks down, like, he's just going to lose it. So eventually he gathers his courage up and looks down. Now, what I think is interesting is did the others just so the others had to have known Will was in the tree, right? They had to have known. So they basically laid a trap for Will, is how I interpret this, where they leave, right? And so the fear kind of thing goes away from Will a little bit. And then as soon as he goes down, he's kind of looking for proof. He wants proof to back up the story that, hey, Royce died because of these others. Take back his shattered sword. And as he's doing that, because he kneels down to take all these shattered swords, he looks up and Royce is above him and strangles him. So it's an interesting idea where it was kind of a trap that was laid, because the others had to have known Will was there, because Royce is calling to him. They probably saw them walk up because, again, Royce was not very quiet about it. So I think the idea here is that this was a trap that was just laid, that the others knew he was there, but they just couldn't be bothered to either climb up or do any of that. They'd wait for him to come down and kill himself, basically. Crasher's children might be Nazgul versions of the others. They definitely cannot be raised to the same level as ordinary whites or whites. Hope George explores that. There's a lot of things we just don't know about the whites, and I really am looking forward to how he explores that. And maybe that's one of the things holding him back from writing Winds of Winter and stuff like that, where he doesn't know how much he should give to us, where he keeps them mysterious, but we learn more about them. I have not heard that, J-Lord. Matthew, that is an interesting question. Where will George go with that? I would like to say that they're an actual race. That maybe, the children created them, but they have turned into their own entity. They are their own race that don't serve really any purpose of the children or anything like that. Will Victarion die at the hands of Daenerys because of your... I don't think Victarion dies unless he betrays Daenerys. I think that maybe he does that at some point. He did say the whites are in Winds of Winter more than... Yeah, they should be, hopefully. Like, at this point, they should. I really hope we're going to see some sort of final conflict with Stannis. But that is the quick summary. So, again... Next week will be Chapter 2, which will be Bran 1. Everybody's favorite POV. You know what I think is hilarious about Bran's first POV? In Bran's first POV, he really isn't the main character. Like, he's really just there to be eyes. And we get a lot more of Jon building and Robb building as a character and Ned as a character. Bran is almost like a minor character in his own chapter, which is quite weird. But yeah, if you guys have any other comments that you guys are questions to this chapter, I don't want to get too far off track. Let me know. I just want more magic in Winds of Winter, more blood sacrifice from the Northerners. I could see him doing that, Aaron. What do you think of the Snow series? I personally don't really care about it. I don't really understand why they're doing a Jon Snow series. I don't know. I just don't. I don't really care about it. So I wonder if they can understand and speak English or some other language that we haven't heard yet. That's an interesting idea because we know they have their own language. So the idea would be, do they understand? Because we know that they were lurking around. Do they understand what Royce was saying? Right? And I don't know, how would that come about, right? How would they learn that? Maybe just observing the wildlings, they could learn that information or that language. Would be interesting. You ever notice Bran was watching Jon and Jon 1? I have not, but we'll definitely get into that when we get to Jon 1. Yes, exactly, Zen. I agree, Young Wolf. I think Stannis dies at the end of Winds of Winter. I think that would be a perfect way to conclude the book, where the others and the Whites, they've made it through the wall, and you have Stannis having one kind of last fight at Winterfell, but he gets overwhelmed, killed, and the rest of the North is able to retreat. I think that is how it probably ends. I think that'd be a cool way of how it ends, because I think George, right, when he first set out on this story, and even since the last book, I think Stannis is following his only grown. So I think George even knows that Stannis is very much a fan favorite character, especially in the books, that I think he will have some fitting end for Stannis. I don't think he's going to live on, though. But that will be the stream. If you guys don't have any other questions related to the chapter, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. I hope you guys have been liking the long videos this week. I have another long one tomorrow. So tomorrow is going to be based on our stream Monday, but it's just going to be my House of the Dragon tier list. I did a comparison to what we did on Monday, and just to kind of do that, but I forgot. Do they actually say why they were tracking the what? No, so there's not any explanation, at least in this chapter. There might be in later chapters when Jon goes to the wall, or maybe with Benjen. I don't remember, but I know for certain, all we know is that Jeor Mormont sends them out to track this group of wildlings. I would assume because they were close to the wall. Do you think Jon will end as the hero in this story? I don't know if he'll be the only hero, but he'll be one of the heroes, I think, of the story. Maybe he'll... I don't know. I just think Jon is the guy that will probably... Well, a lot of that question, Zen, relies on how Jon comes back. If Jon comes back as a changed character and is not the same, like he's a bit more angry, he's a lot more quick to anger, and he's a bit more like Stoneheart, because again, major differences in how quick they're probably going to be brought back and how they will be brought back will be different. So I think that is really the interesting idea there. Do you like that Will survives in the show and gives the foreshadowing for the walkers? Yes. So this is something I like, the show version over the book version, where the show version depicts the younger of the well, not the younger of the three, but the middle one, but the younger of Garrett and Will, and we also see him warning Ned or the North of the threat, and I really like that. Now, what the opposite does here is having Garrett really shows Jon what it's like in the North, like at the Wall. Because Garrett, if you think about it, has lost his ears to frostbite. He's lost a finger. He looks terrible. Like, he looks awful, right? I like that for Jon, but I think as a story overall, I think it's cool that Will survives. I will say Will's death, though, is fantastic. I really love that idea, and I love the way that is used in the first chapter. Makes sense, J-Lord. All right, well, that will be the end of the stream. I know it was a quick stream, guys, but this is kind of what Friday streams are going to be now. It's going to be kind of a quick 20, 30 minutes. They'll be longer as the chapters get longer, or if you guys have more questions, because, again, there's not a ton of questions to have off of this chapter, just except for, like, maybe the others, but we just don't know a lot about them. So thank you guys all for joining the stream. I know it was a little quick one. We'll be back to our streams on Monday, and you guys get a video Saturday, and that will be all. So thank you guys all for watching this.